You've got loads of ruins and buildings and terrain kits that you need to paint, but painting minis takes you ages and you just can't justify the time it would take you to make them all look great. Wrong. Let me tell you how to absolutely smash out awesome looking terrain for your tabletop wargames in no time at all. My name's Guy, you're watching Midwinter Minis. This video has been jointly sponsored by iDemo Games and Mini Wargaming, and I'm going to let you in on a little industry secret. Makeup sponges. That's it. That's the secret. You can use cheap makeup sponges to paint terrain. It's way faster than a paintbrush. It doesn't clog details. You can do easy color transitions. It doesn't look harsh and chalky like dry brushing can, and you don't need an expensive airbrush. So yeah, thanks for watching, I guess. I'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Oh, okay, fine, I'll tell you how to actually do it, and how to get your terrain from box to tabletop faster than you thought possible. Makeup sponges generally come in 3 different types. There's these solid foam blender sponges, which you can soak in water for a moment to get nice and wet, squeeze out the excess, dab them onto your paint, and then onto whatever surface you want to paint. They produce a very finely textured circular area of paint, which can easily be dabbed and blended around to create a heavier effect, or just tap lightly to add a fine highlight with soft edges. You can also get these cleansing sponges, which have a sort of fibrous but airy texture, kinda like a loofah. The same prep is involved. Get them moist in your water, wring out the excess, dab it in the paint of whatever color you want to use, blot it around on the palette, and then move to the surface you want to paint. These create a much more pronounced, speckly, natural texture. Very useful for adding noisy, grungy highlights, which again is really good for creating stone effects. Then there's puff sponges, which have a really finely detailed fabric on the outside. These make quite a unique texture effect when sponged on in the same way, almost like leather or skin. And cleaning these sponges once you've used them is really simple. Just submerge them in your water pot and give them a few squidges against the edge. Once the excess paint is out of them, wring them out and just leave them to dry. They'll probably stain, but honestly, who cares? So that's the basics covered. Now let's see what it actually looks like on some terrain. Now, terrain kits can be made of loads of different materials. Plastic, MDF, plaster, and more common these days, FDM 3D prints. But the technique I'm going to show you works amazingly well on everything, and even helps hide those 3D printer layer lines that dry brushing can often accentuate. So first things first, you're going to need to assemble your terrain kit. I've covered model prep in detail in so many previous videos, so I'm going to kind of gloss over it here, but just make sure you've scraped away any mold lines and that the pieces are nice and solidly glued together. There are a couple of tips that I haven't really shared that are uniquely useful for FDM 3D printing prep though. Sometimes you'll notice a little rim, kind of a flash at the bottom of the model where it was fixed to the print bed. You can often just run this across a sponge nail file for a sec to clear it off, but if it's a bit thicker, you can either snap it off, or if you want an even cleaner line, just run the edge of a hobby blade around the edge at a slight angle and it'll just come right off. If your terrain has a lot of hollow details like these windows, you might get this kind of super thin, stringing spiderweb-like residue. Again, not a problem. Either pinch it off or crack open your window, put a mask on and use a lighter to lick away the wispy bits with flame for a second. They are just instantly vaporized. Don't linger on any spot for too long though, otherwise it'll melt, or it could actually catch fire. If you're doing the flame technique, don't get too worried if it gets slightly discolored though, because we'll be painting it anyway. If your terrain kit is magnetized like this Ruins of Perdition set, this is the perfect time to glue in the magnets too, because they'll get painted up and won't stick out as much as if they were raw metal. Put a mark on one side of the magnet stack to make sure you don't confuse the polarity when attaching them to your corner pillar sections, a little dot of glue, push it in, pinch away the whole magnet column, and yeah, done. Then flip the magnet stack around, mark the other end so you know you flipped the polarity, and then just fill up the wall section holes. Same way. Easy peasy. Just a quick check to make sure I didn't mess it up. Yeah, pow, nailed it. So now everything is prepped and ready and you're sure all of your glue is fully dry, it's time to prime. And for this set, I'm going to prime it black. This is an absolutely essential step for loads of reasons. First off, a primer layer bonds better to the model's surface, which helps the paint you'll be putting on later stick better and be more durable, so way less likely to scratch off over time. It also provides a dark shadow undercolor to not only build up from, but as a fail-safe that if you don't quite reach all of the nooks and crannies with your base coats, it doesn't really matter because it'll still be black. You don't need to aim for really heavy coverage at any point, as you'll be doing multiple passes from different sides, but the finish should build up gradually and be really solid. And also, if you're in the UK, an essential step is to then rush everything indoors, because what was a decently sunny day about 7 minutes ago is now looking a bit, yeah, it is actually raining. Cool. Once the first side is dry, flip everything over and do the same again. Obviously, if your terrain is a solid piece, follow the same steps, but keep rotating it as each side dries to get an even coverage all over the model. For reference, this whole set used pretty much a full can of primer, so you're gonna need to put a new Colourforge order in. And by the way, if you are wanting to get some of my Midwinter Ice Colourforge primer in the USA, you can now. Stock apparently arrived last month. I'll leave a link in the description. But you know what they don't really have in the US? Ancient castles, old churches, majestic cathedrals, a good old ruin. Now honestly, you can't seem to go anywhere in the UK without tripping over a National Heritage site, so let's go for a little walk and get some colour inspiration for this particular set of ruins. This is Colchester, where I live, officially the UK's unhappiest place. Hopefully no coincidence. Anyway, down this pretty sad looking street in the town centre, you have a blink and you miss it alley that leads to an absolutely gorgeous church, which has been built, destroyed, rebuilt, sieged, rebuilt, bombed, and rebuilt again over the last 900 years, but I don't care about that. I care about what's over there. This is St. Botolph's Priory, which wasn't rebuilt, it was just left to rot. And yeah, as I said, the UK, and I mean most of Europe for that matter, is rammed with ruins like this. No doubt the reason why Gothic style architecture and ruins have been such a core aesthetic element of the very British Warhammer 40k. Although technically this isn't Gothic, it's Norman Romanesque. The arches are rounded, not pointed. That wouldn't become the style for about 150 years after this was made. Anyway, this ruin has loads of cool colours we can incorporate into our painted terrain kits. Essex has very little quarryable stone, and historically solid building materials were pretty scarce, so what we're seeing here is carved limestone used pretty sparingly around the doors. That should be pretty easy to replicate with some nice tans. We've also got flint rubble making up the bulk of the non-ornamental structure, so yeah, greys and pale tans, maybe even a slightly bluish hue here and there. And then we've got reused Roman clay bricks, which they're all over Colchester. So this already 900-year-old building was built using some bricks that were already 1,000 years old when this was built. Totally wild. It kind of gives you a realistic impression of what stuff might look like after centuries and millennia of warfare that games like Warhammer 40k depict in their lore though. Anyway, some nice terracottas and earth tones should work pretty well to match those colours. And let's not forget there's plants and moss growing all over the place. Anyway, research done, let's get back home and paint up some terrain. I feel like it would probably make sense to paint the main sections of the walls to match that greyish flint look. So I'm going to start off with the darkest colour in this little swatch, and that's dark slate grey, and we're going to apply this to every single terrain piece. Spreading it around to make sure there's not too much on the sponge, and then just smashing it all over the terrain bits. This part in particular is an absolute no-brainer process. You can do it idly in the background of watching a show, or listening to a podcast, or I don't know, watching a cool YouTube video by your favourite hobby content creator. Like and subscribe. Now it might not look like it's having much of an effect, but honestly I think you can see a big difference between the slate and the black primer. Now if you don't fancy dabbing, you can also use the sponge eggs as a big fat brush, sweeping it across the surfaces, but be warned, depending on how sharp or spiky your terrain kits are, it might rip the sponges up, so yeah, just use your discretion. Again, between each colour, just make sure you're squashing out the excess paint against the side of your water pot. Wring it out and leave it to dry. This is where these sponges coming in sets is quite handy, so you can just switch to a different sponge each time you move to a new colour. And the next colour I'm going to use is this French blue, which is a slightly blue tinged grey, and I'm going to apply this in exactly the same way as before, but I'm just going to be a bit more patchy and sparing with it, making sure there's some areas that are a little bit heavier coverage than others. And as you can see, the great thing about using a sponge is that all of the recesses and cracks and crevices just don't get any coverage at all unless you really jam the sponge in there, so it creates a kind of nice dramatic contrasting look without accentuating 3D printed layer lines like dry brushing might. Again, on smoother areas, I streaked instead of dabbing to get faster coverage. It is such a fast process doing it like this. I mean, each section takes literally seconds, and you don't have to worry about paintbrush streaks or constantly returning to your palette for more paint. Absolutely magic. For this step, I'm going to ignore the pillar sections because I think I want them to look like brickwork. The final colour of the flint rubble is going to be this nice shale grey. But instead of using the smooth sponges this time, I'm going to switch out to the fibrous, bubbly cleansing sponges. This is going to add an awesome speckly, stony texture look to the whole thing, and it's ridiculously easy to do. A couple of seconds of dabbing on each section and you're done. And yeah, just like that, the grey section's sorted. Time to move on to the next colour, and that's going to be the pale, light limestone colours. And I feel that all the doors and window sections of these parts would lend themselves well to this colour to make them stand out. So starting off with this Adriatic skin paint, I'll use a smaller sponge to paint the doors, windows and arches. These circular windows are, man, it's an absolute doddle to paint like this. Just push it in the hole, done. You don't need to worry about being perfect, especially along the edges, in the same way that you can be less precise with army painting because everything is going to look impressive as a group. You're just not going to focus on individual imperfections on a whole table of painted terrain and buildings. Honestly, it's just so ridiculously fast. Now, by the way, while you watch me just rattle through this stuff, I mentioned it before, but this is the new Ruins of Perdition set from iDemo Games, and they sent me this half-table bundle to try out. I wanted to make a sponge painting terrain video, so I thought, hey, let's kill two birds with one stone. As you'll have already seen, what makes this stuff awesome and genuinely clever is that it can be magnetized so that it all can be broken down into flat sections and stored away easily between games in this little box. It all fits in here, which is great for terrain addicts like me who are desperately running out of storage space. It's obviously totally modular too, so if you like to do competitive play, you can do the symmetrical ruin layouts easy peasy. Proper line of sight lanes, standardized footprints, all that stuff. But if you want to have narrative fun instead, you can build it literally however you like. They're also designed with speed painting in mind, with textures that are chunky in all the right ways, so you can smash out a set in an afternoon like this and have it looking awesome for game night. So yeah, if your terrain is eating your hobby time and your storage space, this might be worth a look. The Kickstarter has about 2 weeks to go at the time I put this video out, and I'll keep the relevant links in the description so you can check it out whenever. You can buy pre-printed sets like this in various bundle sizes, but if you already have a 3D printer, you can buy the whole STL set and do it yourself. So I mean, it's a win-win. Anyway, let's switch to this lighter tech ceramic color and use that rougher cleansing sponge to add some texture. Again, I don't really care if I get this on the grey, literally no one will care. Stone isn't perfect. Let's just get the texture down and move on to the next part. And that's going to be the brick colored parts, which for my terrain set is going to be all of the columns. No pointy bits on these really, so I did the sweeping technique rather than the dabbing, which meant that each column got its first layer in about 10 seconds. It's also a little bit trickier to hit the columns that are already rendered as part of the larger sections, but honestly, as I said, it doesn't matter if the colour bleeds out a little bit on the sides, or if the coverage isn't perfect on the column itself, because in the grand scheme of things, when viewed as a whole, the terrain set will still look awesome. Next, we are going to use the geniusly named Mild Curry paint and the texture sponge to dab on some speckly, brighter areas on the terracotta base parts. Easy peasy. Now, I was thinking about doing all of these plate metal floors in metallics, but honestly, those brick red paints I just used make such an accidentally good rust color combo, I think I'll just duplicate that on these parts too. Yeah. It works really, really well. Okay, so everything is pretty bright and stark now. Now, if you like that look, just leave it here. But I prefer a darker, grimier look to my tabletop wargames, so I'm going to crack out my big old vat of DIY dip wash that I made years ago and paint this on all over everything with a big, soft brush. First paintbrush of the project, mind. Now, if you want to make some of this stuff for yourself, follow the link that just popped up. It works out to be about 10 times cheaper than your regular hobby washes like Null Oil or Strong Tone, and you can make it whatever shade you like. Now, after about an hour, it should all be dry, looking awesome, and I mean ready to game, honestly. As an optional extra, you can make your terrain look really overgrown and ancient with some foliage. This is also a great way of masking off any areas that FDM printed stuff like this can sometimes leave visible layer lines, like on the curves and slopes, like on the windows and the broken columns. The easiest way to do this is simply use dried herbs and PVA glue. Something like marjoram or oregano, however you want to say it, is perfect here. The tiny leaf fragments and the shredded stems will combine with the PVA to make a really messy looking slurry that you can then slop onto any areas of the terrain you like, covering any ugly spots or smushing into the corners for extra realism. Just make sure not to clog any areas that might snap together, like on these kits. And after a few hours, it'll be exceptionally solid, very hard to flake off. Now, all the herbs will have been rehydrated slightly by the glue, but because the acrylic polymer and the PVA will have been absorbed into the herbs, it'll have plastified it as it dried to some extent, which should stop them rotting, and it'll also make them totally lose their smell after about a day. Now, if the PVA has left a shiny residue behind, just give everything a quick blast with some matte varnish from a rattle can, and that should make everything look way more uniform. As a final touch, you could also add some very watered down green paint, just randomly splotched and spattered on to look like moss. There's some specific products that are designed to be perfect for this, like Dirty Down Moss, but honestly, watered down green paint also does wonders, and chances are you already have it. So yeah, that's how to use sponges to rapidly paint up your wargaming terrain in a fast, beginner-friendly way. So easy, in fact, that 4-year-olds can do it. They obviously don't want to do boring greys and earth tones like Daddy though.
Dad, I like that camera. I chose purple, lilac and pink.
That's right.
Is it okay if I get my hands on?
Oh yeah, it's great if you get it on your hands. Why don't you tell me what colours you chose?
I got this one. I got bogey green.
Yeah.
Deep green. This one. Got Dungle Shadow Green.
Very good. Great job.
It's okay if you get messy. Wow, very nice violet.
What are you doing?
Finished.
Very nice.
Okay, I might not be out of a job yet, but come on now, the twins are 4. If they can do this, you can absolutely smash it out the park. And I mean, that's enough from me. Don't forget to visit the link in the description if you want to check out the Ruins of Perdition terrain set for yourself. I'll catch you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.